My name is Klisman Murati, and I run the investment research consultancy Pareto Economics. It's a consultancy and a research firm that helps clients in the investment circuit, in global business, and in government relations make better investing and long-term strategic decisions. What we have to understand as a society is that our institutions in which we've created in today's world are very short-term in terms of their thinking. Whether they're governments thinking every 4 years, so every election cycle, or whether you're a business thinking in terms of every quarter. The issues that we're facing in today's world, be it geopolitical risk, globalization, opportunities, technological changes, and societal changes, require much more long-term thinking because the impact of these phenomena are also much more long-term. So if you approach the world in very short-term ways, then you'll always get reactionary strategy, which never works well. So I encourage my audience and my clients to think long-term by providing the fundamental basis that they can understand the world to think long-term. Because without this, you're always looking at whatever the next crisis is, and you always be in a state of shock or a state of confusion or nervousness when making decisions because you think the world is very unpredictable, whereas actually it's not as unpredictable as people may think it is. Look, and undoubtedly, the world is changing in many different ways. But fundamentally, when you are having a situation where businesses are looking to invest globally, and where countries are also looking for foreign direct investment to improve the situation in their countries, two big things stand out to me that require much more attention. The first one is the rising level of sovereign debt in the world, which is impacting the ability of countries to use that money to actually put into public services, and it's not going there anymore. Is going into servicing debt, and also geopolitical changes across the world, which are impacting the world significantly. And not only in the hotspots that we're used to seeing across the world, but also regionally. It may not come up on the news as often, but we are definitely seeing changes in the world in terms of geopolitics, because overall countries are growing their power, which is allowing them to be much more forceful in the international stage to actually get what they want. I think to boil it down, it's ignorance of what are the things which are going to impact us into the future. Because each individual sector, each individual company understands itself and understands its market. But what we're seeing now is crossover in terms of market impact, and things which are happening across the world are impacting businesses on the other side of the world because the world is becoming increasingly interconnected, and that knowledge of how this interconnectedness is impacting both companies and countries is not well understood. And it's not well understood because we have never seen a time in history like today where the big four, we call them the big four: globalization, geopolitics, transformative technology, and societal change, are impacting the world simultaneously, and they're converging. So this is something which isn't understood as well, in my opinion, and we are seeing the impacts of this in the global marketplace, with confusion and with short-term thinking being the result. Very good question. So our global power index is based off of the physics concept of first principles. So we apply first principles thinking to world affairs. And this index is a way in which we can measure power. And the way we understand power is the ability of a country to secure their own interests. The ability of a country to secure their own interests. So that's what we measure. It's made up of 6 different factors which go into the index, including a country's active consumer market, their military balance, their technological leadership, systemically important commodities, geostrategic positioning, and their financial strength. So we have created 6 sub-indices to measure these 6 different areas, and we put them together to create the super index, or the global power index, where we measure 194 countries and to see how they grow and they develop across time, across these 7 different measures. And with these insights, we're able to much more accurately forecast the future trends of countries. So when we're speaking to our audience of investors or corporations or governments, we can project how these countries are going to develop and grow over time, and to give a lot of value to our clients based on data-backed research and based on research which they can use straight away in their own organizations. Well, every year we host a summit ourselves where we showcase the rankings every year to see how things are changing. And it's interesting to see in terms of the regions. Europe currently, over the last 10 years, has shown to be the most powerful region in the world, followed closely by the Asia Pacific region. And I think some countries which may not get as much attention because everyone focuses on the top 10, for example, countries. The countries which I think are very interesting to plot over the next 10 years, I think, are Botswana. There are many interesting things are happening there. I think also India, having now the biggest population in the world, and a lot of opportunities for growth and development and geopolitical activity there. And also Turkey, in my opinion, personally, I think seeing how the country has grown and developed over time is a very interesting country and very independent from the political pressures of both the East and the West, and has the ability to really maneuver itself across time in the regions and in the situations that it wants to place itself in. But obviously, the world is big and countries are changing consistently. But these three, I think, for me, off the top of my head, are the three most interesting that we're seeing develop right now. I think informing yourself from proper sources is the fundamental crux of what causes issues in the world. And I'll give you an example. I've been in meetings many times with different investors and different kinds of governments discussing issues in relation to how the world is changing. And I'm surprised by learning where they get their facts from. A lot of the time they focus on getting their facts from reading newspapers as a primary source of data. And this really shocks me myself, because when you're managing a portfolio of billions of pounds and dollars, I expect myself for these investors to be much more informed as to what are the macro trends and global changes happening across the world. So if organizations and organizational leaders take information from primary sources, going to the source of where news comes from and where changes are happening, then they're in a much better position to make more long-term decisions. If you're basing your strategy on watching the news, reading headlines, and that being your primary driver or primary source of information when making these very important and oftentimes long-term investment and policy-making decisions, you're not in the best place to make these long-term decisions confidently, because you're basing your analysis not on fundamentals, but you're basing your analysis on things which are changing constantly, the news cycle, which isn't the best place to go. And that causes a lot of the ignorance that we see in the world as it relates to knowing what's happening around the world and knowing what will impact you and your business and your country moving into the future. The space domain has become very popular recently as it's become commercialized. But believe you me, since the early 50s, if not earlier, we have seen a big focus on outer space. It tends to be the part of the world or outside of the world which has the biggest impact on us as human beings. So whether you're looking at space politics, space mining, whether you're looking at space entrepreneurship, the fourth domain of warfare, as the people in the military call it, has a lot of potential. And it being a commons for humanity, it needs to be taken care of very, very seriously. So when people are looking at what's happening in outer space, we must understand that it's an extension of power from what's happening here domestically on Earth. And the powers which, as measured by our index, are leading in sort of Earth-based power, which is a new concept, I suppose, these are going to be the leaders in outer space too. As they focus their money and their attention on becoming a much more prolific power, what we tend to see is smaller countries and countries which may not have been as active in the outer space domain now being much more active, because they're seeing the potential in that. So whether it's the UAE, whether it's India, putting more space assets out into outer space, and other countries which are focusing their attention on outer space, we must realize that this fourth domain of business opportunity and military opportunity must be understood in a much more focused way for anyone who is looking to develop their economies and also looking to develop their businesses across the world, to see how this impacts the world in a much more succinct way. Next for me is essentially working further, helping governments and helping investors better understand how the world is changing. As an organization, we now have the ability to finance governments also and to finance different corporations. So it's a very interesting time when we're having conversations with these governments, talking to them about how the world is changing, looking at organizations like how BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization are developing, how NATO is growing, and reading the international landscape is always interesting. And it's about developing further, engaging with as many clients as we can to help them in their long-term journey, and enjoying it at the same time. Because the second you stop enjoying what you're doing, I don't think it's worth doing it anymore. I love it. I think I have the best job in the world, and I look forward to working with you guys into the future and having me as a speaker for your future events.